Today I'm going to talk about why exposition is not only not a bad thing, but it's actually essential to making your screenplay great. And I'm going to give you a few of my favorite tips on how you can use it well.
Well done.
Obviously, exposition can be terrible. Done poorly, it can completely kill the flow of a script and take us right out of a movie. And I will talk about that as well as how to avoid it. But you know what else is terrible? When I'm completely fucking confused. Something I see in scripts from non-professional writers all the time, and this is not a knock on newer writers, by the way. Someday I'm gonna do something really stupid, like put my first script up on the blacklist so that you can all see the 2 out of 10 that it scores, because we all gotta start somewhere. But anyway, something that I see all the time, especially in the first act, is things happen that I just don't really understand, and characters do things that don't really make a whole lot of sense. And at least in the examples I'm talking about, it's not because those characters are inconsistent or there's no actual logic to the world. The writer actually has those things figured out, and many times those explanations do wind up in the script. But all too often it's not until like the back half of it, which means I've been kind of confused for the first half of it, and that means I've been bored. And if there is one absolute rule in screenwriting, it is that you cannot afford to be boring. Many of these writers say it's because they just want to build up some mystery. And that might be true. My hunch is that an even bigger motivation is they're actually scared of writing exposition, but let's assume that it's just about mystery and suspense and intrigue for a second. Fine. I stumbled across this gem of a book in a used bookstore a couple years ago. It is a collection of just writings on writing by Kurt Vonnegut, who is maybe a little bit of a cliche favorite author, but he's still one of my favorite authors. And he has this great quote in it that has stuck with me ever since I read it. Give your readers as much information as possible, as soon as possible. To hell with suspense. Readers should have such a complete understanding of what is going on, where and why, that they could finish the story themselves should cockroaches eat the last few pages. There's a reason that Vonnegut's one of my favorite authors, and I really think there's a ton of truth to that quote. And I also think it's true whether you're talking about books or movies. Even when Alfred Hitchcock tried to define suspense, he did it with that classic example of a bomb being beneath a table and the audience being in on that information while the two people at the table having a normal everyday conversation have no idea that it's there, ticking away, about to end their lives. By giving the audience information, you're actually injecting energy into the story. Exposition is the setup that allows the rest of the story to work. And because of that, what I want to focus on in this video is the exposition that like 99% of screenplays should really have in their first acts. First, let's talk about setting. Vonnegut had a similar quote about this. He felt very strongly that a writer should tell a reader where they are within the first couple paragraphs, because by removing that question, it allows the reader to stop focusing on where they are and just focus on the story. I think it's excellent advice, and ever since reading it, I've taken extra care to make sure that the setting is clear within like the first couple pages of my screenplay. You can do this visually. A shot of the Empire State Building tells us that we're in New York City. You can do it with a superimposed title on the screen, which we see all the time. Shit, some movies even start with entire blocks of written text before the actual movie even starts, and sometimes they even do more than that. Looking at you, Star Wars. And occasionally you can even use dialogue to let the audience know where they are and still make it feel like it's organic to the story. And by the way, you don't always need to get as specific as a particular city. Some movies, such as Seven, are set in places that are meant to be a little bit ambiguous. But right off the bat in that movie, we understood the type of city we were in, and that was important.
I meant to ask you something. When we spoke on the phone before?
Yep.
Why here? You actually fought to get reassigned here.
Now, I wasn't standing around guarding the Taco Bell. I've worked homicide 5 years.
Not here.
I understand that.
Well, over the next 7 days, Detective, you'll do me the favor of remembering that.
We understood the vibe of it, and that was enough for our brains to fill in what the surrounding world was supposed to be like. But if it matters that it's New York City or somebody's going to call attention to that later, then get that information out there quickly. Okay, second, make sure before the inciting incident happens that you've given us enough exposition about your protagonist, like who they are and what they care about, so that we understand why the inciting incident matters so much to them. We need to know what they want from life, or at least what they expect from it, so that we get why this moment completely upsets that expectation whether it's for better or for worse. When we move into the second act of a movie, it's because the protagonist has made a decision to pursue a goal. Before they make that decision, we need to understand A, what that goal is, B, why it's going to be difficult to achieve it, and C, what happens if they fail. Lack of clarity around the goal a protagonist has is an incredibly common issue I see from newer writers, and it sucks all of the energy out of their script as we move into Act 2. For all but the rarest of movies, that goal is a core part of the concept itself. So make sure it's crystal clear to the audience and get that information out there before the second act begins. If you have any confusion around things like wants and needs and flaws and goals, or if you could just use a refresher, I did a video on that a couple months ago using Shrek as an example, and it covers everything you need to know in less than 8 minutes. And by the way, if these kind of videos are useful to you, then make sure to hit those subscribe and like buttons, because then you'll just see more of them. Anyway, the fourth thing that we need to understand in Act 1, or at least very early on in Act 2, is this: the antagonist's motivation. I truly learned the value of this about 2.5 years ago when I was working on rewrites of Aftermath for Voltage Pictures. I understood why my antagonist was doing the things that he was doing, but that information didn't really hit the screen until late in Act 2. And since he was doing some pretty awful things, the people I was working with felt that the why for those actions needed to come a lot sooner. So I executed that note and I found a way to get some key exposition in early on in Act 2, and as it turns out, they were right. But also, and maybe this was part of the reasoning behind that note, but it was a key learning moment for me, when you let the audience know your antagonist's motivation up front, you achieve something else. You make it clear how far they're willing to go to achieve their own goals, and that heightens the stakes of your movie. Because if we know what the antagonist is willing to do and why, then we know that it'll be that much harder for your protagonist to succeed. So there are obviously many other times that you need to explain things in your movie, and there are also times where it makes sense to hold a little bit of information back. That is essential to delivering a good reveal or twist. It's like how in Die Hard we knew that Hans was after the $640 million in bearer bonds very early on, but we didn't know about his plans to blow up the rooftop until much, much later. But do yourself a favor and think through your current script and ask yourself if you're being cagey or unclear about any of those 4 things that I mentioned. If you are, do the work to get that exposition in, and I can almost guarantee it'll make your second act take off with way more energy. Okay, but how do you write exposition without it being terrible? Look, I try to be as transparent as possible in every single one of these videos, and the truth is, it is a skill, it can take a lot of finesse, and it might just take a while before you feel like you're doing it well. Sometimes, even now, I find it to be a real chore. But it is worth it, and I have figured out a few tricks along the way that have helped me, so I will share a few of those now. First, let's talk about what bad exposition usually looks like. It typically comes down to 1 or 2 things. Either it's boring and it causes the scene to drag, or the only reason that a character is delivering that exposition is for the benefit of the audience. In other words, they're saying something that they wouldn't normally say given the context of the scene that they're in right now. If my lead says to another character, "Hey Ben, ever since we were best friends in high school 15 years ago," that is bad exposition because Ben already knows all of that, and my lead knows that he knows all of that, so he would never say those things. Similarly, if I'm watching your movie on Netflix and you make me sit through 2 minutes of your character droning on about everything I need to know about the world, I'm gonna be tempted to check my phone, as much as that embarrasses me. And even worse, I might choose to watch something else. Good exposition, on the other hand, also normally has 1 of 2 things going on. Either it's delivered as an answer to a specific question that you've put in our minds, or it's delivered along with some tension or some conflict or something else that's entertaining. Here are 3 tricks that you can try. 1, in order to make us curious, make a character we like or care about curious. It's even better if you can layer that curiosity with some other kind of urgent emotion. If they really want to know the answer to that question, then so will we. And when that question gets answered for them, not only will it feel natural, but instead of feeling like heavy-handed exposition, we'll actually find it satisfying. 2, create a situation where a character needs to say a piece of exposition in order to stop something bad from happening to them, or to make something good happen for them. I'll give you another example using Die Hard. John gets up from his seat in the plane in the opening scene, and the guy sitting next to him notices he has a gun. He looks alarmed, and in order to keep him from getting freaked out or potentially causing a disturbance on the plane, John tells him,
"It's okay, I'm a cop."
It's simple, it's clean, and by the top of page 2, we know that John can use a gun. 3. If you've ever read Save the Cat by Blake Snyder, you might recognize this one. I read that book over a decade ago, and although I didn't agree with necessarily everything in it, one thing that really stuck with me was this: the Pope in the pool. He was referring to this script that he read called The Plot to Kill the Pope, and he was really impressed by this exposition scene that took place while the Pope was swimming in a pool. It was so bizarre to see the Pope put on a bathing suit and go swimming that it completely hid that exposition under the veil of entertainment. That DNA scene in Jurassic Park does the exact same thing, and it works great. So if you can make exposition entertaining, do it. Many times you can use 2 or 3 of these techniques at once for like maximum effectiveness. Take the scene in Minority Report where Tom Cruise's character, John Anderton, explains how pre-crime works to Colin Farrell's character, Danny Whitwer. Danny is basically there as this bureaucrat who is skeptical about the idea of locking up people who haven't committed a crime yet. He's a bit cocky, but he's likable, and he asks a question that we then automatically have ourselves. How can you possibly know someone will commit a crime if they haven't actually committed it yet? So right away, we have method 1. Make us curious by having a character be curious. John Anderton, on the other hand, believes wholeheartedly in this program, and he desperately wants it to not only succeed, but to expand across the entire nation. He needs to give Danny an answer that'll satisfy him, or the program risks being shut down. And that is method 2. Force a character to offer up some exposition in order to prevent something bad from happening to them. And finally, method 3, John takes a ball that has a murderer's name etched into it, and he rolls it across a desk, forcing Danny to reach out and catch it before it hits the ground.
Why'd you catch that? Because it was gonna fall. You're certain? Yeah, but it didn't fall. You caught it. The fact that you prevented it from happening doesn't change the fact that it was going to happen.
The movie needs this piece of exposition to work, but we're perfectly fine with it because it took advantage of our curiosity and then it layered in some conflict and entertainment on top of it. And also, you might note, it happened in the first act. So what about you? Do you have a favorite tip for handling exposition? Leave it below in the comments, I'd love to see it. And if you're enjoying this channel, please do hit those like and subscribe buttons. Not only will that make sure that YouTube shows it to more writers, but it will also make it that much more likely that you get to see the next one. Thanks so much everybody, and happy writing.